Okay, let's invite Mr. Lyle. So, Mr. Lyle, please switch on your camera and microphone when you are ready.
Yep. Okay. Thank you, Nagao-san. Okay, I'm ready. Yeah. Let me share my screen. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. So as was introduced, my name is Richard Lyle, Vice President here at Intralink and President of the British Chamber of Commerce in Japan. So just a little bit about me. I've been in Japan for over 30 years now, and actually 15 years ago, I used to live in Kansai, working for the British Consulate General there in Osaka. So I know the region very, very well. It's a great place to do business, of course. So anyway, today I wanted to talk a little bit about technology trends in Europe and what's happening and opportunities for collaboration with Japanese companies. So first of all, I'd like to talk about, give you a bit of background on Europe and what's happening currently in the region. Just a quick overview of the European sort of landscape. So the population is 742 million people, and it's quite a large area consisting of many different countries with many different languages. But I think mostly in business, English is widely spoken across the region, so that tends to be the language for international business. But of course, then locally within countries, there are local languages for business. Within the European Union, it continues to grow. So there's 27 member countries now, but obviously there's more candidate countries, so that will continue to grow. It has a very good infrastructure for energy, the internet, electricity, and so forth. So internet penetration is 93%, and R&D expenditure is 2.27%. So a little bit lower than the USA, but R&D is treated very seriously here. And as we will hear today, a lot of R&D is done within startups coming out of universities and other places, of course. So let's talk a little bit about the current climate in terms of the startup and venture capital arena. So it'll be no surprise with all of the problems we're seeing in the world at the moment with high interest rates, high inflation, and other sort of geopolitical issues. There's been an effect on the venture capital ecosystem as well. So across the world, we're seeing a reduction in the amount of investment into startups. So that's not just Europe, it's across the world. It's a worldwide phenomenon, unfortunately. So it's pretty even across the planet, but we've seen probably about half of the investment as in previous years. When we look at Europe specifically, again, this is a similar trend. So for most countries across Europe, they've seen the funding rounds and funding availability drop. Of course, it varies by country, but again, mostly by about 50 or so %, a little bit bigger in some areas than others. And what has that done for the sector in general? So this is obviously a few key factors, but not the whole picture. But what we're seeing across various companies and startups is they're probably doing three main things to cope with the current situation. Firstly, or three main things are happening with regards to the current situation. So firstly, in terms of valuation of companies, those are down, of course. So in usual times, when companies are sold, usually or returns on investments are realized, usually it's about 7.8 or 8 times returns. However, what we've seen is that that's now dropped to about 5-time returns for venture capital. So again, this is making venture capital a little bit more cautious to invest because returns are lower. So there's less money for companies to get access to help them grow. So this is obviously slowing the sector a little bit. Then within companies, we're seeing that staff are being laid off to save costs. Venture companies don't have very much money, and a lot of the cash is often spent on staff. So a way to save money is obviously to reduce staff. So we're seeing that obviously staff is being laid off in this area. And then finally, again, this is all related. In terms of funding, the rounds, the amount of money raised is about 20% down compared to previous years. So what we're seeing here is then basically money is not less available. Companies are having to tighten their belts, and funding is more difficult to get hold of. That said, the European ecosystem still is big and does continue to grow. So it's currently valued at about $3 trillion. And within that, there's a good split between the public market investment and the private. And you can see on this graph, if we go back to 2014, there's been a gradual increase in the sector. And interesting enough, during the pandemic, there was significantly more growth because obviously people were at home. Venture companies are very flexible. People working at home could focus on growing their companies and taking advantage of new opportunities that the pandemic had given, such as the digital and online platforms to develop new business models because we couldn't meet each other face to face. Okay. So within all of this, there is, of course, some hope for the future. So although funding has dried up, it hasn't dried up completely, and there is still money available. So for companies that have better business models or more convincing business models for investors, they are still getting access to money. So obviously the money is following selective companies that have more robust business models or likely to have a better future for the investors. Okay, and then talking about the trends in Europe. So actually, Europe follows very closely what's happening in North America, and actually is growing to a similar sort of scale as North America. So Europe is increasingly becoming a really interesting place to find innovation, new ideas, new startups, and new places for collaboration and doing business. So traditionally, I think a lot of Japanese companies look straight to America for that, but increasingly there are growing opportunities coming out of Europe. I'll go into a little bit more detail about this shortly. Okay, just a quick slide on the Japanese view on innovation out of Europe. Just one second. So you can see here that increasingly Japanese companies are opening R&D or innovation hubs across Europe. And as of 2021, there were 53 of them. There's some familiar names there on this slide, such as Nissei, Daiichi Life, KDDI. But again, these companies are increasingly realizing that Europe is a goldmine of tech and innovation. So to be able to get access to that, it makes sense to have an innovation hub or innovation activities spread out of Europe. This can be in a number of countries, such as the UK, or mainland Europe, such as Germany and other places. But this is a trend which we will continue to see as Japanese companies increasingly search for innovation overseas, and actually often within Europe, it's a lot easier to get access to innovation than it is sometimes in the US, because it's much more competitive there. So increasing Japanese companies are seeing that it's advantageous to be based in Europe. Okay. One second. Okay. So next then, I want to talk about the startup system ecosystem in Europe. Okay. So first of all, let's look at access to talent. So in the innovation space, really a lot of businesses are driven by people within those companies, the very, very smart people within those companies that have very technical degrees and expertise in very, very increasingly very specific areas of technology. So access to talent is really, really important. As you can see from the figure here on the picture here on the right, there are a number of areas where there's a huge amount of engineers. This is just 3 areas, but spread across Europe, there's a great pool of engineers that companies and startups can get access to. So about 500,000 people across London, Paris, and Berlin, which is similar to Silicon Valley. And that's just 3 hubs within Europe. Increasingly, there's other areas that are increasingly growing, such as Estonia and Northern Europe and other places as well. So it's a great place to get access to really, really smart people to help develop ideas. Okay. Within Europe also, there's very strong links to the universities and academia. So actually, the statistic here speaks for itself. So over 90% of startup employees came out of European universities. So obviously, there's a very strong link to universities. So often what we find is that there's the incubators and accelerators are often very, very closely associated with either specific universities or clusters across Europe, so that technologies that are being developed within the universities are then spun out to those incubators and accelerators, and then often the researchers come with those companies and staff are brought in to actually grow those companies into bigger scale-ups. So there's a very strong link to the universities, and you can see with the figure on the right there. Often these are linked to to global cities such as excuse me, London. Just one second. These are often linked to global cities such as London, Paris, Barcelona, Madrid, or Munich. And the numbers talk for themselves. Lots of universities and university students, which then feed into a vibrant startup ecosystem. Okay. Another important thing to say is that a lot of the startups based out of Europe are actually, born global. So they might be based in Berlin or Barcelona or wherever, but from day one, they often very internationally focused companies. So again, the statistic here talks for itself, that 62% of startups have presences in other countries. So often the business models for these companies is suitable for the home market, of course, but from day one, the entrepreneurs are thinking about where the opportunities are across Europe or across the world. And within that, of course, Asia is a very important and lucrative market. So a lot of the startups have their sights on the Asian market, of course. Okay. And this just sort of summarizes the situation about the ecosystem. So repeating some of what I've said. So In terms of growth, it's going in the right direction. The startup ecosystem is getting larger and larger and larger, and the themes or the key sectors in terms of areas of technology on the right there. You can see transport, energy, and food, of course, being very, very important. But then other areas such as health and fintech and software. So again, there's a good range of different types of sectors and types of startups across Europe. Okay, and then this is a really interesting map which shows the unicorns spread all across Europe. Unicorns are not just limited to one country or one cluster or one place. This map shows that basically technology is coming from all over Europe and really interesting technology is coming out of all of Europe. So unicorns are spread across the whole of Europe. So again, I think we will increasingly see the number increase, but currently there's about, in 2021, there was about 131 unicorns employing 135,000 people. Okay. Then in terms of innovation rankings, so again, across Europe, depending on the sector, there will be hubs and clusters of really interesting technologies and sectors. So again, I think if you know a little bit about Europe, no surprises as to where some of those leading edge sectors are in terms of what they're doing and what's happening. And again, this is spread across Europe. So in the north, you've got, in the center, you've got Switzerland, which is a very innovative place, known for manufacturing, pharmaceuticals, chemicals, and other areas of innovation. But then Sweden is also a close second behind them. Then within Europe, there's pockets of different areas, with London being ranked as the number two global startup ecosystem, and then Luxembourg and Germany also emerging as very strong areas for technology. So again, if you're interested in collaborating with startups in Europe, they're going to be, depending on your specific needs, they might be spread across the whole of Europe. So you can't just say, go to London to meet companies. You might have to go across Europe to meet them because they'll be spread across the whole of Europe. Okay. All right. This is an interesting sort of diagram which shows some of the sort of the core sectors that countries are very, very strong in. So again, this is just a representation. I think also shows that within Europe, if you just go to one place, you're not going to see the whole breadth of the innovation landscape across Europe, but within certain areas, there's very strong pockets of innovation. So for example, in the UK, there's fintech, of course, and e-commerce, but then in places like the Czech Republic, edtech is very strong, for example, or consumer mobile apps. So really, if you're depending on what technology areas you're interested in, that will then lead to perhaps where it's best to try and find those companies within Europe. But of course, there are different hubs within Europe which are strong in different areas. So the UK is strong in fintech, but so is Ireland, and so are other parts of Europe as well. So again, it's really important to, if you're thinking of working with startups in Europe, to really research properly who they are and where they are to fully understand that. Okay, next then, I want to talk a little bit about some of the technologies coming out of Europe. Okay, so again, this is going to be a little bit of generalization. Of course, as I sort of mentioned, earlier, Europe is a hotbed of innovation with many, many different types of technologies and startups coming out. But this is just, picking up on some of the recent themes coming out of Europe. So this isn't everything, but this is some areas that are quite hot and should be definitely worth looking into. So let's start then with generative AI. So I think we've all seen in the news all of the news and hype around AI and generative AI. It's for a reason. Obviously, it's very exciting times. It's going to be, groundbreaking in terms of some of the things that we can do. We can use data and information to help us with across multiple sectors, such as medical, energy, and other areas. So it's no surprise to say that generative AI is a hot sector in Europe. And is really starting to get attention. And I'll talk about some of the companies in this sector later on in my talk, of course. Then we have financial services. So this has been perhaps a long-term one for Europe. So financial centers such as Europe and Frankfurt and so forth have always been associated with very strong startups in financial services. But again, I think what we're seeing is again with the move to the online space for services and the way we live our lives, increasingly we're seeing the banking sector moved from buildings and bricks to the online space. So that's driving a lot of innovation in the sector. So we'll see some really interesting technologies in this area to help consumers on their mobile phones gain access to their money and do interesting things with their money. Third area is climate and purpose. Again, this will probably be no surprise. If we look at the news every day, there's global warming, all these, every day on the news is another area of the world that's being affected by some freak storm or flooding or extreme weather event. So there's a lot of emphasis in Europe on trying to deal with the situation, to help us as a human race to hand the planet to our children and our children's children. So climate and purpose is really increasing importance in terms of technologies and startups coming out of Europe. So for all of these three things, I'll give you some examples in a minute, but I think especially around climate and purpose, there's some really, really interesting companies, some really interesting ideas. And this is a huge area, of course. So this, again, covers multiple sectors from food through to clothing, through to plastics, through to chemicals, and so forth, through to energy, of course, and other areas. So I think in climate and purpose, we'll see some really, really interesting companies coming out. And I think generative AI will feed into this area as well to help us gain, as more and more data is generated, that AI will look at that data and inform us of how we can use that data to then help us solve some huge challenges around climate change and sustainability and so forth. Okay, move on. All right, so let me then talk about a few examples in these three areas. And just to be clear, these are just a few examples. So this isn't a long list. It's just to give you an idea of some of the sorts of technologies that have been coming out of Europe. And some of them, of course, you may have heard of before. And in fact, you may have even used yourselves in your day-to-day life or job. So first of all, we have, currently there's about 150 startups in this area. So again, you can see coming out of Europe, coming out of the UK and Germany, there's a big chunk of those companies, but there are other areas these companies are coming out of. So this list is actually the 3 best funded, so the ones that have obviously are being backed by the venture funds in terms of what they think are going to be the winners, of course. So since these is a London-based company for making videos and to generate talking head videos and text from actor clips. So this company's got a lot of attention. So you can see the numbers there, 144 million euros in funding, and it's just raised another 85 in Series C. So this one will probably become a unicorn company in the not too distant future. So rapidly growing, obviously has lots of different applications in terms of being able to provide content online, visual content online. Then we have Aleph Alpha. So this basically is a tool catering to businesses and governments, and again, getting a lot of funding from various places, and getting the attention of big names such as SAP and NVIDIA and so forth. And then the third example is DeepL. So this is one, if you've been dealing with foreign companies in English, maybe you've been using this to translate emails and understand what's being said. So this is a translation tool that you can download from your PC or your mobile phone, and provides very, very sort of smart and accurate translations across multiple languages, of course, not just Japanese and English. So again, this is getting a lot of attention, and I think we will see rapidly grow. But as I mentioned before, generative AI will be multiple sectors. It'll cover all sorts of areas across, I think, very exciting areas such as medical, so helping to diagnose disease earlier, spot problems, help patients before they get sick, and so forth. And again, maybe thinking about the climate change, being able to analyze a lot of data to make sense of that data, to help us to understand what's going on and be able to deal with, generate technologies to help to remediate those problems. Okay. Next then, I'd like to look at financial services. So again, this is just a snapshot of some of the interesting financial services companies coming out of Europe. So not all of them, of course, yeah. So we have Alma, which is based in France, of course, in Paris. And this is a payment solution company. Business can receive full payment up front, regardless of the chosen method. So here we're seeing entrepreneurs look at really sort of interesting and innovative and new ways of doing business. You can see here, no setup of subscription fees, no contracts, no commitments. So again, what they're doing is they're looking at problems in the market, and then trying to find solutions to solve those problems for the sake of the consumers or users, whether that be individuals or businesses, and so forth. Then we have 10 times or 10x Banking, which is a London-based startup established in 2016. And this is, data-driven company. So this is revolution banking for banks. So this is more of a B2B type company. So helping banks to work with other banks in terms of their operations, but also helping customers as well. So again, they've just secured their Series C funding of 150 million euros, and they've just secured up to take them to 204 million euros. Then we have Anyfin. So this is based in Northern Europe, in Stockholm, and this basically looks to enhance your financial health by giving people insights into their spending habits and what they're doing. So again, a really innovative way. So giving people help to sort of manage their expenses and budgets and stuff by providing them with information to help them make smarter choices about their money and how it's used. And then finally, we have a Spanish-based company from Madrid, which supports SaaS-based startups with their analytics for non-dilutive funding. So obviously a very sort of niche area that they're working in, but this is basically helping those startups to get more access to funding. So again, I think you can see here some really diverse and different applications, and this is just a small handful of them. So again, I think we're seeing what entrepreneurs are doing is they're looking at specific problems in the market, and then what they're trying to do is find a solution to solve that problem, and in an easy and accessible way to do that. All right. Then if we look at climate and purpose, so again, this is just a few representative examples of these companies. And again, I think this shows this is a really broad and diverse area. So we have e-commerce, or here from Germany, founded in 2021, and already it's a unicorn within a couple of years, right? So that's incredible, right? So what they're doing is they're installing energy systems such as solar panels to reduce reliance on the grid. As we know, in Europe, with the problems that we've been happening over the past few years with Ukraine, energy has become a huge issue across Europe. So what this company is trying to do is using renewable energy to actually try and solve people's reliance on fossil fuels from other countries. So it's about energy security. Next, we have Agrina. So this is from Northern Europe in Copenhagen. And this is a digital platform for agricultural trade, which is, again, a really interesting solution. So this is helping farmers to actually turn their land into a carbon sink, so to soak up carbon, and then they can earn carbon credits. So in the market, there may be big companies such as chemical companies or steel companies that obviously need to try and address their carbon footprint. So maybe they'll want to purchase credits, and then Agrina can offer those those credits through their carbon sinks. So again, this is another very rapidly growing company, which will very rapidly growing company. Then finally, we have Nucleo. So this is a UK, London-based company, and what they're doing is they're developing very small modular nuclear reactors, so making them really much easier to own and operate, because of so there'll be reduced costs and waste. So again, traditionally power plants and nuclear plants have been huge operations. This is again looking at trying to solve the problem by making much smaller and localized plants to help reduce costs and waste and so forth. So again, three simple examples, but I think it shows that in this sector, there's really a lot of different types of problems and solutions being addressed. And so there's a huge range of different opportunities that are being generated here. So again, this is an area where the world needs to come together to solve the climate problem and global warming. So these companies are seeing this as an opportunity to do some good for the world through their companies. Okay. All right. And just to give you a quick overview of some examples of how collaboration, excuse me, just one second. So just to give you an example of how collaboration happens between Japanese companies and startups in Europe. This is just a few examples of the types of mechanisms that can be used when collaboration happens. So the first example is a joint venture. So this is between a Portuguese company and Mitsui to develop biodiesels and biojet for aviation and other applications. And this is basically in a refinery, and it's really it's trying to take waste to fuel to make a sustainable fuel production. We had next example is a memorandum of understanding, an MOU between Mitsubishi Heavy Industries and FNT Software, and this is for energy management and infrastructure management to enhance data center operations. So, as we've heard earlier, with generative AI, there's going to be an exponential increase in the amount of data out in the world. All of that data needs a place to live, which is in data centers. So across the world, we're seeing a huge increase in the number of data centers. That includes here in Japan, of course, but those data centers need a lot of energy to run. So increasingly, this company is looking at how we can make sure that huge growth in data and huge growth in data centers isn't going to have an adverse effect on the planet. So this MOU with FNT is to look at how to better manage the energy management of those data centers. Then we had a collaboration with SoftBank and OneWeb. So this is a distribution partnership for their satellite communication services across Japan. And then finally, we see acquisition. So often Japanese companies see interesting technologies and actually they would like to have exclusive access to that technology. So in those cases, that's where acquisition will happen, where they buy the company and so forth. In this case, this was a Belgian company with an offshore wind platform, and JERA was looking to get access to what they had to help it to achieve its decarbonization targets. So they bought the company. So as you can see, collaboration can take many different forms. I think probably a key challenge is when Japanese companies first meet startups. There's obviously a huge challenge in terms of the language barrier, the cultural barrier, and the distance. But you can see that if you can get over those, then there are some great opportunities for collaboration and to work with overseas companies. Okay. Okay, I'd just like to spend a few minutes just to wrap up before we go into Q&A, just talk a little bit about Intralink and the company I work for. So let's go through these very, very quickly. So we're an international business development and innovation consultancy, and we specialize in Asia. So not just Japan, but we have offices across Asia. And so technology is at the heart of what we do. So in making this presentation today, a lot of this is in my daily life. I'm seeing this all the time. We're working with startups and scale-ups all the time, bringing them into the Japanese market. And I think what we've seen is that Japan is really hungry for innovation, really hungry for new ideas, and so increasingly is open to collaborating But as I mentioned, with the language and cultural barrier, there can be issues. So that's where companies like us can help to step in to ease the process. We have 3 areas of we work in. We work in international market expansion, where we help mostly European and North American companies come into the Japanese market. We do corporate international corporate development, which is basically helping Japanese corporates source innovation overseas, and a big chunk of that is Europe, of course. And then we work with governments and embassies and economic development organizations around trade and investment. Okay, we have offices across the world. So I'm based here in Tokyo, in Japan, and actually we just opened an office in Osaka. So we have an office down there now, of course, but we have offices across the globe. So we're an international organization. And no surprises, a lot of our offices are based in areas of technology and innovation across the globe. We have about 150 staff across the world. We're all bilingual. So I'm Japanese and English, but our colleagues in Korea, Korean and English, and so forth. And really at the heart of what we do is we're focused on business and commercial results and doing business and closing deals. I work across many different sectors. So I'm personally involved in energy and environment, but we work across many different sectors as outlined here. So automotive and consumer and telecoms and so forth. So we often travel down to Osaka to meet potential customers, of course, some of the big companies in Osaka and the Kansai region. We've worked with a very, very broad range of different clients. So we've worked with a huge range of different scale-ups. So just to pick out a few here, so Ceres is a fuel cell company based out of the UK. We've worked with Hamleys, that's a British company that sells toys, and then other companies across other different types of sectors, such as medtech, the online space, and so forth. Corporate innovation, we've worked with many of the big Japanese corporations. So I see, for example, Nitto there, which I think is an Osaka-based company, for example. And then we've worked with many different foreign organizations and embassies, such as the British, States in the US, the Swiss, and so forth. Okay. And I think this final one says it all. So really what we are about is getting results for our clients and driving their business in Japan. Okay, so I would like to wrap up there. So in summary, I think I've only spent 45 minutes, I think, or so talking about Europe. Really, I think it's safe to say I've captured a very, very tiny part of what is happening in Europe. I think hopefully what you can see is it's a really exciting place in terms of really interesting and new technologies and startups coming out of the region, and the region as a whole, not just one place. So if you're interested in finding out more about the region, about what's going on in Europe, you really need to look across the whole of Europe. So to start with, obviously, what sectors, what subsectors you're interested in, and then that search will then lead you to perhaps the relevant parts of Europe. And then I think in my talk, towards the end of my talk, I was talking about some of the collaboration. So what we are seeing is increasingly Japanese companies do want to get access to the best technologies in the world. So increasingly, we're seeing Japanese companies looking to Europe to collaborate and get access to innovation. And that collaboration can take many different types of forms, from licensing deals through to acquisition. And then in doing the business, there are some challenges in terms of distance, culture, and language. But what I would say is I would encourage everyone to give it a try, because if you give it a try, then what you'll see is some of those technologies can really transform your business or can really give you new business opportunities and open up the world to you. Once you've done it once, then it gets a lot easier as well. So anyway, thank you very much for listening today. Very happy to take any questions now.
はい、ライル様、ありがとうございました。非常に最新の情報を
Mr. Lyle, thank you very much. Thank you very much for providing us the cutting edge and latest information, especially the focusing on Japan. It was very informative. And there are quite a few questions that we received, so I'd like to ask some of them.
Yes.
The first question. Well, during the pandemic, even during that period, Japanese companies' open innovation bases were increased. That is quite interesting. Is that because of the pandemic, or regardless of the pandemic, this kind of movement by the Japanese companies increased domestically and expanded to European region? So which is the case?
Yeah, so it's I think it's a mixed picture. So the trend, as you saw on that graph, was going upwards. So it obviously started before the pandemic, but I would say the pandemic. So in some ways, the pandemic speeded up the process, because what companies realized was that actually with everyone, not Japanese, not just Japanese people, American, European, we all had to go online to do our shopping or to do our banking, or even to do our business, right? So I think a lot of companies saw there was opportunities there. So a lot of those Japanese corporations are large corporations, so they already have bases in Europe. So it was easy for them to add an extra, department or an innovation department to their existing operations. So probably that trend in the pandemic wasn't a new company going to Europe and setting up an innovation office. It was probably a company that had operations in Europe already and deciding to expand to do that. And actually, because the Japanese market was closed, it was even more important for those their colleagues overseas to meet interesting startups overseas to bring that knowledge back to their colleagues in the Japanese market. So I think it probably sped up. So I think the long way of saying probably the Corona pandemic did actually speed up that trend. Yes.
ありがとうございます。ちょっとたくさん
Thank you very much. Actually, we have many questions, so let me move on to the next question. So you mentioned that tech investment has been slowing. So you mentioned that. So even if tech investment has been slowing down, however, some companies enjoy funding, and which area has enjoyed successful funding? And also, is there any common mindset or initiative among startups successful in funding?
Yeah, so interesting question. So I would say, if you go back through my presentation, so I think generative AI and climate and sustainability have definitely continued to receive funding. So you saw that some of those companies they've got funding very recently. So those companies in those sectors definitely are getting access to that funding. And this is nothing new in terms of companies getting the money. So the venture capital follows the smart ideas and the hot ideas and the ones that make most sense. So in terms of companies that receive the money, of course, it's the companies that have really interesting business models and a proven path to that success. At the end of the day, venture capital wants to get a return on their investment. They're not doing it for the fun; they're doing it for business, right? So really, they want to see that their return on investment. So venture capital is really laser focused on those companies where they say, "Oh yes, this this sector or this business model in this company, yes, we think that will make us money, so they follow it. So I think, yes, it's those two areas, yeah.
Thank you very much. We have a little bit more time, so I'd like to take another question. About the generative AI, which is a very important topic that many Japanese people are paying attention. So the cross-industry or cross-section, you say that the generative AI is having the impact on across their industries. So thanks to generative AI, is there any example that the generative AI has made a huge impact? Do you have any example in your mind? Any particular industries or examples that the generative AI made a huge impact? For example, in medicine or environment, any interesting example that you can share with us?
Yes. So I would say my gut feeling is medical will be really huge. I can't remember the exact name of the company, but I think last week I was listening to the news in the UK, and there was a company talking about screening for cancer, and it was showing that this company was showing that actually, if a doctor who usually scans scans for cancer, so a patient comes in to be scanned for cancer, then a person looks at that scan and says, yes, maybe that's cancer, or no, maybe it's not cancer. And that's hugely time consuming and is a very sort of skilled job. What that company did was that doctor could train the AI, and literally after, a very short period of time, the AI was already better than the doctor, literally, in a very, very short period of time. So sorry, I can't remember the name of the exact company, but I think for those sort of things where you have humans doing jobs which are very time consuming, AI will really revolutionize and actually be better than humans, because they can actually draw on a massive pool of data, whereas a person can only draw on their own knowledge. So that's one area. But I think in the next 6 months, 1 year, you'll see a huge amount of companies coming out in this area. So it's really one to watch. And there'll be many, many different examples. That's just one very, very simple example.
ありがとうございます。それでは最後のご質問。
Thank you very much. This is the last question to you. Osaka is scheduled to host Expo 2025. Therefore, we would like to increase the collaboration with overseas companies. When it comes to collaboration with Europe, we don't have any experiences. I think it's very challenging, and it's a bit hesitating. Therefore, for the beginner of collaboration in Europe, if you have any advice to such a beginner, so please share with us. This is not a question, but like an opinion. So do you have any idea or suggestion about how to do business in Europe for the beginner in particular?
Yes. Really interesting question. So I would say, so first of all, focus on who it is you want, who it is you're interested in doing business with. So as I mentioned, what specific area you're looking to develop your business in. So once you've identified those potential targets out of Europe, it could be a few startup companies in Europe. The next thing is, obviously, at the end of the day, we're all humans. We may speak different language and have a different culture, but we're humans, and we want to be successful. So I would say, don't be shy, just give it a go. And actually, initially, it might be a little bit challenging because of the language and culture barriers. But at the end of the day, especially in technology, mathematics is mathematics. You can speak Japanese or English or French or German, but maths is maths, right? So increasingly around technology, the language is the concepts are very similar. So actually, for commercial discussions, it may be a bit more challenging, of course, but for the tech and understanding the technology, often engineer to engineer, you don't need so much language because you look at drawings or diagrams or and whiteboards and stuff like that. So I think that's, start there. And I would say the other thing is probably that's easier face to face. Online is probably a bit more challenging to understand, what they're saying or what they're feeling. So again, I think I heard mention about the expo. So again, if there's opportunities for you to meet in person those startups, that can make it often be a lot easier. And don't worry about it. At the end of the day, we're humans. You don't have to be 100% perfect English. As long as you can be understood, just try. I would say. So don't be shy. Just try.
はい、ありがとうございました。それではお時間になりましたので、
Thank you very much. So we'd like to conclude the Q&A session. Mr. Richard Lyle, thank you very much for your very informative keynote speech. Thank you so much,
You're welcome.
Mr. Lyle.
Thank you very much for inviting me here today. Yes, goodbye.
ありがとうございました。